Jack the Ripper, the mysterious serial killer whose identity has long remained a mystery.
For 137 years, Jack the Ripper was a ghost, a phantom that Scotland Yard couldn't catch, historians couldn't identify, and Hollywood turned into myth. They told us he was a royal, a surgeon, a mastermind hiding behind wealth and power. They were all wrong. New DNA evidence has just shattered every theory ever written about this case. Scientists pulled genetic material from a blood-soaked shawl found at one of his crime scenes.
DNA from a shawl recovered at the scene of one of his crimes has incredibly found a 100% match.
And ran it against living descendants. The results? A perfect match. We now know exactly who Jack the Ripper was. And here's what should disturb you. He wasn't a genius, he wasn't elite. He was a 23-year-old immigrant who cut hair in the same neighborhood where he butchered 5 women. The police knew his name. They watched him walk the streets, and they did nothing while London bled. The object that cracked the case. Everything traces back to a single object, a blood-stained silk shawl that spent over a century hidden in a family's attic. For generations, the legend of Jack the Ripper was untouchable, a ghost story built from fog, gaslight, and Victorian terror. He was the phantom who humiliated Scotland Yard and vanished without a trace. Hundreds of suspects, zero proof. Everyone was convinced the Ripper had to be someone extraordinary, a brilliant surgeon, a tortured artist. Some believed he was royalty itself, shielded by the crown. But here's the catch. The evidence that finally exposed him wasn't buried in some palace conspiracy. It was lying in the gutter at the feet of his 4th victim, Catherine Eddowes, on September 30th, 1888. A police officer named Amos Simpson stood at that crime scene. He picked up the shawl and took it home, planning to give it to his wife. When she saw the dark stains soaked into the silk, she recoiled. She refused to touch it. So Simpson folded it up, placed it in a box, and there it stayed, passed down through his family for over 100 years. Most experts dismissed it as worthless. Just another fake in a market drowning in Ripper memorabilia. Then Russell Edwards found it. In 2007, Edwards, an author and obsessive amateur detective, spotted the shawl at auction. Something about it gripped him. He bought it, and he made a decision that would rewrite criminal history. He would bet everything on technology the Victorian police couldn't have imagined. Edwards tracked down Dr. Jari Louw-Helanen, a forensic scientist at Liverpool John Moores University, who specialized in extracting DNA from degraded samples. When Edwards first showed him the shawl, Louw-Helanen was skeptical. This wasn't some pristine sample. This was silk over 125 years old, contaminated by countless hands. Getting anything usable? Most scientists would call it impossible. But Louw-Helanen agreed to try. And what happened next would change everything we thought we knew about history's most infamous killer. The DNA speaks inside a sterile laboratory. Dr. Louw-Helanen and his team worked in near silence. They focused on the stains, using cutting-edge extraction techniques to isolate microscopic genetic material still clinging to the fabric. They were hunting for mitochondrial DNA. And get this, mitochondrial DNA is different from regular DNA. You inherit it only from your mother. She got it from her mother, an unbroken chain stretching back thousands of years. It survives when everything else crumbles. It's a genetic time machine, the perfect weapon for solving century-old cold cases. The first test was simple. Was the shawl even real? The team tracked down a living descendant of Catherine Eddowes' sister. They took a DNA sample. They compared it to the genetic material from the bloodstains. The results came back. Louw-Helanen stared at the screen. Then he called Edwards. It was a match. The shawl was authentic. It had been at the crime scene in 1888, soaked in the victim's blood. That alone sent shockwaves through the research community. But then they found something else, mixed with Catherine's. DNA were other biological traces, traces consistent with semen. Think about that for a second. The killer's genetic signature, left behind in his moment of horrific violence, preserved for 137 years. Now came the moment that would solve the case. Edwards and the team had a prime suspect, a name that had haunted police files for over a century. They tracked down a living female line descendant of that suspect's sister. They obtained a sample. They ran the comparison. The room went quiet. When the result appeared, Russell Edwards later said his hands started shaking. It matched. After 137 years, science had done what Scotland Yard never could. It pointed directly to one man. His name was Aaron Kosminski. But the DNA was about to reveal something far darker. Because Kosminski wasn't some shadowy stranger who slipped through the cracks. He was the man police had suspected all along. The suspect they let walk free. Here's the deal. The name Aaron Kosminski doesn't sell movie tickets. It doesn't sound like a criminal mastermind. And that's exactly what makes this so disturbing. The real Jack the Ripper wasn't a brilliant doctor. He wasn't a prince. He was a 23-year-old Polish immigrant who worked as a hairdresser in the heart of Whitechapel. He wasn't a phantom who outsmarted police. He was a local. He lived in the neighborhood. And the officers investigating the murders knew exactly who he was. Kosminski had fled Poland, then part of the Russian Empire, to escape the brutal pogroms targeting Jewish families. He arrived in London with his relatives and settled in the East End. By all accounts, he was deeply disturbed. Modern psychiatrists who've reviewed the historical records believe he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. He heard voices, he experienced violent hallucinations, and according to police documents, he harbored a profound, terrifying hatred of women. This isn't speculation. This is what the detectives working the case believed at the time. While newspapers invented wild theories about mad surgeons, senior officers were quietly building their own suspect list. Kosminski's name sat at the very top. Chief Constable Melville McNaghan wrote an internal memo in 1894 naming Kosminski as a primary suspect. He described him as a man with strong homicidal tendencies and a deep aversion to women. And get this, the most explosive evidence comes from the man who ran the entire investigation. Chief Inspector Donald Swanson oversaw the Ripper case from start to finish. He walked those bloody streets every single day. Years after he retired, he got his hands on a copy of his superior's memoirs. And in the margins, right next to the section about Jack the Ripper, Swanson scribbled a private note. He wrote that the killer was Kosminski, the man who was committed to an asylum and died there. Let that sink in. The officer in charge of the case privately confirmed the killer's identity, in his own handwriting, hidden in the margins of a book. The timeline seals it. Kosminski lived right in the middle of the murder locations. He was known to be violent. In 1891, his family had him committed to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum, where he remained until his death. When did the Ripper killings stop? The exact moment Aaron Kosminski was removed from the streets. But to understand how this monster operated, you have to understand the nightmare world that allowed him to hunt. The killing ground. The London of 1888 was an elegant romance. It was hell on earth. The wealthy lived in grand townhouses to the west, but the East End, especially Whitechapel, was one of the most overcrowded, diseased, and desperate places on the planet. Over 900,000 souls crammed into a few square miles. A suffocating labyrinth of unlit alleys and hidden courtyards where screams disappeared into darkness. The air was poison, a thick yellow fog mixing river mist with coal smoke. Some nights, you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. It was a predator's paradise. If you want to keep uncovering secrets history tried to bury, hit subscribe now. At the center of this nightmare were the lodging houses. Foul, overcrowded dens where you could rent a bed for a few pennies a night. Some offered what they called a 4-penny coffin, literally a coffin-shaped wooden box to sleep in. For the women who became the Ripper's victims, survival meant scraping together those pennies every single night. That desperation made them vulnerable. That desperation got them killed. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. They weren't glamorous. They were middle-aged, poor, exhausted women fighting to survive one more night. They walked fog-choked streets in darkness, searching for any way to earn the price of a bed. Here's the catch. This environment didn't just hide the monster, it let him hunt freely. Police were hopelessly outmatched. No radios, no forensics, no fingerprints. In Whitechapel's maze, a man could kill and vanish into fog and crowds in under 60 seconds. The Ripper didn't need to be a genius. He just needed to be local. Know every alley, every shadow, every escape route. The streets were a trap. and police were about to be sent on the greatest wild goose chase in criminal history. How the media created a monster. With the city in panic, Scotland Yard launched one of the largest manhunts ever attempted. They flooded Whitechapel with officers, interviewed over 2,000 people, detained and questioned at least 80 suspects. So, why didn't they catch him? They weren't just fighting a killer. They were drowning in a media circus that buried them in lies. There was no forensic science as we know it. Crime scene preservation barely existed. When a body was discovered, crowds rushed in. Reporters trampled evidence. The scene was destroyed in minutes. They found clues, but they didn't know what to do with them. Near Catherine Eddowes' body, the same victim connected to the shawl, police discovered a piece of her bloody apron. On the wall above it, chalk writing, reading, "The yous are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Was it a message from the killer? Some researchers believe Kosminski, who was Jewish, may have written it to deflect suspicion onto his own community. The wild theory is that he was taunting the police. We'll never know. Commissioner Sir Charles Warren, fearing anti-Jewish riots, ordered it erased immediately. They washed away crucial physical evidence. Then the letters arrived, and the killer became a celebrity. The infamous Dear Boss letter reached a London news agency. It taunted police and was signed with a name that would echo through history, Jack the Ripper. But here's the catch. Most experts now believe that letter was a fake, probably written by a journalist to sell newspapers. It triggered a media frenzy that buried police under thousands of copycat letters. But one letter was different, the From Hell letter. Arrived at the doorstep of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee chairman. It came with a small cardboard box. Inside was half of a preserved human kidney. The writer claimed it belonged to Catherine Eddowes. And get this, Catherine had her kidney surgically removed by her killer. The shawl held one more secret, the controversy that refuses to die. The debate that won't end. So, case closed, right? The DNA points to Aaron Kosminski, the police's prime suspect. His institutionalization matches when the killing stopped. Not everyone agrees. The moment the findings were published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences in 2019, critics attacked. Their biggest weapon? Contamination. The shawl is 137 years old. It passed through police, collectors, family members, and researchers before ever reaching a sterile lab. Some scientists argue there's no way to prove the DNA recovered isn't from later handlers. Others question the methodology. Mitochondrial DNA can confirm someone belongs to a maternal lineage, but it can't identify a specific individual with absolute certainty. But defenders fire back hard. Dr. Llewellyn's team followed rigorous protocols. Samples were tested multiple times. The matches were independently verified. And here's what critics can't explain away. The DNA evidence aligns perfectly with everything the Victorian police already suspected. The geography, the psychology, the timeline, the private notes from the officers who worked the case. After 137 years, science delivered what Scotland Yard couldn't. A name, but here's what should haunt you. The police knew. They watched Kosminski, and for reasons never explained, they let him keep walking those streets while bodies piled up. Some researchers believe political pressure forced them to look away. The wild theory is that arresting a Jewish immigrant during intense anti-Semitism would have sparked riots. Others think they simply lacked evidence for court. Whatever the reason, the mystery of Jack the Ripper was never really about who he was. It was about why they let him get away with it. So, what do you think? Is the DNA the final answer? Or is the real Ripper still laughing at us from history's shadows? Drop your theory in the comments. And if this changed how you see history's most infamous killer, hit like and subscribe for more secrets they never wanted you to find.